In this video, we'll dive into Arthur Conan Doyle's novel, The Red-Headed League, a Sherlock Holmes story. One autumn morning, a perplexed man named Jabez Wilson visits Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street. Wilson, a stout pawnbroker with fiery red hair, has an unusual story. He tells Holmes and Dr. Watson about a peculiar job he was recently hired for, copying out the Encyclopedia Britannica. The advertisement that offered this job had one odd requirement. Applicants must have distinctly red hair. This job, part of something called the Red-Headed League, seemed like easy money, and Wilson, with his bright red hair, was hired on the spot. His task was simple: show up to an office daily and copy text for 4 hours, earning him a handsome salary of £4 a week. Everything went smoothly for a few weeks, until one day, without warning, the office was abruptly closed. A note was pinned to the door reading, "The Red-Headed League is dissolved." And Wilson had no idea what had happened. He visited the landlord of the office building, only to discover that the person who hired him was not the tenant, but a stranger who had rented the office temporarily under a false name. Wilson, confused and out of work, sought Holmes' help in figuring out what was really going on. Intrigued, Holmes asks Wilson several questions about his assistant, Vincent Spaulding, who had urged him to take the strange job. Spaulding, it turns out, had been working for Wilson at a lower wage than usual, and was frequently found spending time in the shop's cellar. This fact piqued Holmes' interest, and he, along with Watson, decides to visit Wilson's pawnshop. Once there, Holmes observes Spaulding closely, noting a suspicious dirt mark on his knees. After a brief visit, Holmes and Watson leave, but the detective seems to have already figured out the puzzle. He spends the rest of the day gathering more information, and by nightfall, he has a plan. Holmes explains to Watson that the Red-Headed League was nothing more than a distraction. The whole purpose of hiring Wilson for the fake job was to get him out of his shop every day for several hours. Why? So that Spaulding, whose real identity is John Clay, a notorious criminal, could dig a tunnel from the shop's basement to the nearby city and suburban bank. The tunnel would allow Clay and his accomplices to break into the bank's vault. Knowing the criminals are close to finishing their tunnel, planning the robbery, Holmes, Watson, and Inspector Jones of Scotland Yard set a trap. They hide inside the bank's vault and wait in silence. Late that night, the criminals break through the tunnel into the vault, only to be caught red-handed by Holmes and the police. John Clay, despite his arrogance, is arrested and taken into custody. The next morning, Holmes explains the case to Watson in detail. The unusual nature of the Red-Headed League and Spaulding's strange behavior in the cellar were key clues. Holmes deduced that the purpose of the scheme was to occupy Wilson's time while the criminals tunneled toward the bank. He had guessed the exact timing of the robbery by observing the signs of recent digging, and knowing the vault would likely be targeted soon. Thanks to Holmes' keen observations and quick thinking, the crime is foiled, and Jabez Wilson's unwitting involvement in a bank robbery ends without consequence. Holmes, as usual, dismisses his work as elementary, leaving Watson in awe of his friend's extraordinary